She'll always be financially dependent, Mom announced to her garden club friends, her voice carrying across the patio where I stood near the roses. Dad swirled his scotch and nodded. No business sense whatsoever. Never had it, never will. I adjusted a bloom that had fallen from its arrangement and smiled softly. Their family attorney, Mr. Harrison, appeared at the French doors, his face ashen. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I need to speak with you immediately. The $28 million debt holder is calling the loan effective Monday. He paused, looking directly at me. It's your daughter. The champagne stopped flowing. 12 women in designer sundresses froze mid-conversation. I continued arranging the flowers. My name is Natalie Whitmore. I'm 31 years old and I've spent my entire life being told exactly who I was supposed to be. The disappointment. The Whitmore family owned Whitmore Manufacturing, a mid-sized industrial equipment company that my grandfather built from nothing in 1962. By the time I was born, it had grown into a $45 million annual revenue business. Not Fortune 500, but respectable. The kind of company that got your family invited to the right country clubs and ensured your children went to the right schools. The problem was I was never the right child. My brother Marcus was born 3 years before me, and from the moment I entered the world, the comparison began. Marcus was the heir apparent. I was the afterthought. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at the dinner table with my report card, straight A's. I'd worked so hard that semester, staying up late with my flashcards, asking my teacher for extra credit assignments. I slid the card across the table to my father, heart pounding with hope. He glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. That's nice, Natalie. Then Marcus walked in with his report card. BS and CS with 1D in mathematics. Dad stood up, clapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Don't worry, son. Grades don't matter when you've got business instincts. You'll run this company someday." Mom nodded approvingly. Marcus has the Whitmore entrepreneurial spirit. I took my report card back and went to my room. I didn't cry. Even at 7, I was learning not to expect anything different. The pattern continued throughout my childhood. When I was 12, I won the regional spelling bee. 247 competitors and I took first place. The trophy was almost as tall as I was. I came home bursting with pride, carrying it through the front door. Mom was on the phone with Aunt Patricia. She covered the receiver and said, "Put that somewhere. Natalie, your brother just got accepted to basketball camp. The one Senator Morrison's son attends." She went back to her conversation. "Yes, Patricia. We're so proud. The networking opportunities alone." I put the trophy in my closet. It's probably still there. But the memory that crystallized everything happened when I was 16. I developed an interest in finance. Real finance, not the vague business sense my family always talked about. I spent hours reading about markets, studying company valuations, learning how debt structures worked. For my 16th birthday, I asked my father if I could shadow him at Whitmore Manufacturing for a week. He laughed. Actually laughed. "Natalie, sweetheart, the factory floor is no place for you. You wouldn't understand what's happening anyway." He patted my head like I was still 7. "Why don't you ask your mother about planning the spring gala? That's more your speed." Marcus, who was 19 and had just failed his second semester at the state university, was already attending board meetings. I stopped asking after that. That I watched. I listened. When my father had business associates over for dinner, I sat quietly and absorbed everything. When documents were left on his desk, I read them, not to sabotage, just to learn. And what I learned was that my father, for all his talk about business instincts, was not a particularly good businessman. He made decisions based on ego rather than data. He, snorts, refused to modernize equipment because we've always done it this way. He took on debt to fund expansions that weren't justified by market analysis. By the time I left for college, a state school, because the family money was reserved for Marcus' third attempt at higher education, I knew Whitmore Manufacturing was slowly bleeding. I studied finance at college, graduating summa cum. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. Marcus was getting engaged that weekend, and they couldn't miss the party. I didn't expect them to come. I'd stopped expecting things from them years ago. After graduation, I took a job at a small consulting firm in Chicago. The salary was modest, $15,200 a year. But I learned more in those first 2 years than most people learn in a decade. I had a mentor named Dorothy Chin, a brilliant woman who'd built her own firm from nothing. She saw something in me that my family never had. "You have an instinct for distressed assets," she told me once. "You see value where others see failure. That's rare, Natalie." I worked 18-hour days. I lived in a tiny apartment. I saved 40% of everything I earned. And I studied the market with the same obsessive focus I'd once applied to spelling bees and report cards. My family, of course, knew none of this. To them, I was still poor Natalie, working some vague office job in Chicago. When I came home for holidays, Mom would sigh about how I hadn't found a husband yet. Dad would ask when I was going to get serious about life. Marcus would smirk and talk about his corner office at Whitmore Manufacturing, where he'd been installed as vice president despite having no qualifications beyond his last name. I let them believe what they wanted. It was easier that way. What they didn't know was that by the time I was 27, I'd left the consulting firm and started my own investment company, Hartwell Capital. I used my grandmother's maiden name, the one person in my family who'd ever believed in me. She died when I was 14, but she'd left me $30,000 in a trust that my parents didn't know about. That money, combined with my savings and a small loan from Dorothy, became my seed capital. I focused on distressed debt acquisition, buying the debt of struggling companies, and either restructuring for profit or taking control of assets. It was complex, unglamorous work, the kind of work my family would never understand or value. Within 3 years, Hartwell Capital had $180 million in assets under management. By the time I was 30, that number had grown to $340 million. And 18 months ago, a very interesting opportunity crossed my desk. Whitmore Manufacturing was drowning. Marcus' leadership, if you could call it that, had accelerated the company's decline. Bad contracts, worse investments. A manufacturing facility purchased in 2019 that sat empty because Marcus had failed to account for zoning restrictions. The company had taken on $28 million in high-interest debt to stay afloat. Debt that was now held by a regional bank desperate to offload toxic assets. I bought that debt for $19.4 million. I didn't do it for revenge. I didn't do it to hurt my family. I did it because it was a sound investment. The underlying assets of Whitmore Manufacturing, the original facility, the equipment, the client contracts were worth more than the debt. Properly managed, the company could recover. Improperly managed, I'd still recoup my investment through asset liquidation. It was business, pure and simple. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small part of me. The 7-year-old with the ignored report card, the 12-year-old with the closeted trophy, the 16-year-old who just wanted to learn. That felt something when I signed those papers. Not satisfaction, not revenge, maybe just acknowledgement, proof that they'd been wrong about me all along. The garden party was my mother's annual summer affair. 50 of her closest friends gathered to admire her roses and drink champagne that cost more than my first month's rent in Chicago. I hadn't planned to attend. I rarely went home anymore, and when I did, I kept my visits short. But 3 weeks ago, I'd received a call from Mr. Harrison, my parents' attorney. Not about the debt. He didn't know I held it. That information was buried under 3 layers of corporate structure. No, he'd called about my grandmother's estate. Apparently, there was a storage unit that had been overlooked during the original settlement of her affairs. Some personal effects, old photographs, a few pieces of jewelry. Nothing valuable, but Mr. Harrison thought I might want them given that I'd been close to her. I decided to fly home, collect my grandmother's things, and leave before anyone knew I was there. That plan lasted approximately 4 hours. I was at the storage facility when Marcus called. Not my phone. I changed my number years ago. He called the facility directly and had them page me. Natalie, Mom's having her garden party Saturday. You're coming? I don't think it wasn't a question. Mom specifically said she wants both her children there. Something about appearances for the Worthington account. The Worthington account. Even after everything, they were still using family events as business opportunities. Mrs. Worthington was married to the owner of a logistics company that could become a major Whitmore client. My mother had been cultivating that relationship for 2 years. I have to be back in Chicago by Sunday, I said. Great. Party's at 2. Don't wear anything embarrassing. He hung up. I stood in that storage facility, surrounded by my grandmother's memories, and made a decision. I would go to the party. I would be polite, smile, play the role of the disappointing daughter one more time, and then I would leave, collect my grandmother's things, and return to my real life. What I didn't account for was the timing. The loan on Whitmore Manufacturing's debt was coming due. My team at Hartwell Capital had been monitoring the company's financials, and the picture was grim. Marcus had somehow made things even worse in the past 6 months. Cash reserves were nearly depleted. 2 major clients had left for competitors. The loan payments had been late 3 months running. My CFO, David, had prepared the call notice. Standard procedure for a debt holder when payments are consistently late. We'd been planning to send it Monday, giving the company formal notice that we were exercising our right to call the full amount due. But when Mr. Harrison saw me at the garden party, when he recognized me and being a thorough attorney, decided to investigate why Natalie Whitmore might be lingering near conversations about the company's debt. Things accelerated. He made some calls. He followed the corporate paper trail. And by 3:47 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, he walked through my mother's French doors with the expression of a man who just seen a ghost. The party was everything I remembered and nothing I'd missed. Crystal champagne flutes. Women in designer dresses commenting on the hydrangeas. My mother holding court by the rose garden, accepting compliments on her event planning as if she'd done anything besides write checks to the catering company. I wore a simple navy dress, appropriate but unremarkable. The goal was to blend in, fulfill my obligation, and leave. I'd already spotted Mrs. Worthington near the appetizer table and made a mental note to avoid that area. "Natalie." My mother's voice cut through the garden chatter. "Come here." I approached the group she'd assembled for women I vaguely recognized from childhood. All wives of business associates or country club members. The kind of women who measured worth in square footage and husbands' job titles. "This is my daughter." Mom said the word daughter carrying a weight of disappointment that only I could hear. "She works in what is it you do again, dear?" "Something with paperwork." "Financial consulting," I said mildly. "That's nice." Mrs. Patterson, a woman whose husband owned a chain of car dealerships, gave me a sympathetic smile. "My niece does something similar. Data entry, I think." I didn't correct her. "Natalie's always been more academic," Mom continued. "Not like Marcus. He has the real Whitmore business instincts." As if summoned, my brother appeared at my mother's elbow. He'd put on weight since I'd last seen him, and his golf shirt strained against a stomach built by 3 martini lunches. His wife Brittany trailed behind him, her smile as fixed as her hairspray. Speaking of which, Marcus said loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Natalie, I've been meaning to ask, are you still renting that little apartment in Chicago? Because Brittany and I just closed on our 3rd property, Lake House, 4 bedrooms, private dock." "Congratulations," I said. "We should have you visit sometime." Brittany's tone made it clear this invitation would never materialize. "It might be nice for you to see how successful people live." Mom laughed. It was her social laugh, the one she used when she wanted everyone to know she found something amusing without appearing too enthusiastic. "Brittany, don't tease. Natalie's doing fine for herself." "Aren't you, dear?" "I'm doing well." I said she'll always be financially dependent, of course, Mom said to her friends, her voice carrying that particular blend of pity and judgment she'd perfected over the years. "No head for business. Never had it." Dad had wandered over from the bar, scotch in hand. He nodded solemnly. "No business sense whatsoever. Never had it, never will. That's why we've always made sure to include a small trust for her in our estate planning. Someone has to look after her." I smiled softly, the same smile I'd perfected at 7 years old. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that the small trust they'd set aside for me was approximately 0.003% of my current net worth. Hartwell Capital's latest valuation put my personal holdings at $94 million. The trust they thought would look after me was $280,000. But I said nothing. I never said anything. Instead, I excused myself to admire the roses. The next hour passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. I checked my phone periodically, responding to messages from David about the quarterly reports. Nothing urgent, just the normal operations of a $340 million investment firm. At 3:30, I noticed Mr. Harrison arrive. He was my parents' attorney, had been for 20 years, and his presence at social events was unremarkable. What was remarkable was his expression when he spotted me near the garden shed. Recognition, then confusion, then I watched it happen in real time, a dawning horror as pieces began clicking into place. He excused himself from my father and made several phone calls from the far corner of the yard. I watched him without appearing to watch, a skill I developed in childhood. His face grew progressively paler with each conversation. At 3:47, he walked through the French doors. At 3:48, the party changed forever. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I need to speak with you immediately." Mr. Harrison's voice cut through the garden party chatter like a knife. My mother, mid-sentence about the new clubhouse renovations, stopped and frowned. "Gerald were entertaining. Can't this wait until Monday?" "I'm afraid it cannot." He swallowed visibly. "The $28 million debt holder is calling the loan. Effective Monday. Full amount due." The color drained from my father's face. 7:53. His scotch sloshed over the rim of his glass, staining his shirt cuff. That's not possible. We've been making payments." "Late payments, sir. 3 consecutive months per the loan agreement that triggers the right to call the full amount." Marcus pushed forward, his earlier smugness replaced by something approaching panic. "So, we negotiate. We talk to the bank, get an extension. The bank sold the debt 18 months ago." Mr. Harrison's voice was barely above a whisper to a private investment firm. "Then we talked to them." Dad snapped. "Who is it?" "I'll call them myself, explain the situation." Mr. Harrison looked at me. Everyone looked at me. "The debt holder is Hartwell Capital," he said slowly. "A firm owned and operated by your daughter." The champagne stopped flowing. 12 women in designer sundresses froze mid-con conversation. My mother's crystal flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the patio stones. Nobody moved. "That's ridiculous," Marcus finally sputtered. "Natalie doesn't have that kind of money. She works in data entry or whatever." "Financial consulting," I said quietly. Mr. Harrison pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "I verified it with 3 separate sources. Hartwell Capital acquired the debt from First Regional Bank for $19.4 million in February of last year. The firm currently manages $340 million in assets. Ms. Whitmore is the majority owner with 87% control." Dad's glass slipped from his grip, shattering next to Mom's. He didn't seem to notice. "Natalie." Mom's voice was strange, strangled. "Is this true?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. At that moment, my phone rang. I answered it calmly. "Yes, David." My CFO's voice carried clearly in the dead silence of the garden. "Natalie, just confirming the call notice goes out Monday at 9 a.m. "That's correct." "And you're certain about the terms?" "Full amount, 30-day window. Standard procedure." I said the borrower has failed to meet payment obligations for 3 consecutive months. "We're within our rights." "Understood. I'll have legal finalize the documents." I hung up. Marcus's wife had gone white as a sheet. "The lake house," she whispered. Marcus, we just used the company as collateral for the lake house." "Shut up, Brittany." $28 million, Dad said, his voice hollow. "We don't have $28 million. We don't have half of $28 million. "I'm aware," I said. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "If I may, Mr. Whitmore, the company's assets properly liquidated would likely cover the debt, but that would mean the end of Whitmore Manufacturing." My father finished the sentence like a man pronouncing his own death sentence. The garden party guest had begun to edge toward the exits. No one wanted to witness this. Mrs. Worthington, I noticed, was already calling for her car. "You did this." Marcus stepped toward me, his face contorted with rage. "You did this on purpose to destroy us." "I made a sound investment," I said calmly. "Your company has valuable underlying assets. The original facility alone is worth $12 million. The equipment another $8 million. The client contracts, if properly managed, could generate $15 million annually. But you're calling the loan. You're forcing us out. I'm exercising standard debt holder rights in response to missed payments." I met his eyes steadily. 3 consecutive months. "Marcus, that's not revenge. That's negligence." Mom stepped forward, crushing champagne glass beneath her designer heels. "Natalie, please. We're your family. I'm aware. We can fix this. We can make arrangements. We'll give you a position at the company. A real position. VP of Finance. You can help us. I don't need a position." My voice remained level. "I have a company. It's doing quite well. How much?" Dad's question was barely audible. "Excuse me. How much? Your company. Your firm. How much is it worth?" I considered not answering, but something, maybe the ghost of that 7-year-old girl still waiting for acknowledgement, spoke anyway. "The current valuation is $340 million. My personal net worth is approximately $94 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's impossible. You're lying. You have to be lying." As if on cue, my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen. "Excuse me, I need to take this." I stepped away from my family and answered. "Hello, Miss Whitmore. This is Catherine Price from Forbes. We're finalizing our 30 Under 30 retrospective feature, the Where Are They Now edition. You were featured 4 years ago, and we'd love to update our readers on Hartwell Capital's growth from $40 million to $340 million in assets. Can we schedule an interview?" I was aware of my family listening to every word. "I'll have my assistant send some available times." "Wonderful. And congratulations again on the Mercer acquisition. That was quite the coup." "Thank you, Catherine." I hung up and turned back to find my mother crying, my father staring at nothing, Marcus red-faced and trembling, and Brittany already on her phone, probably calling a divorce attorney. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom whispered. I thought about the report card at 7, the trophy at 12, the request to shadow my father at 16. "You never asked," I said. "You were too busy telling me who I was." Immediate consequences. The garden party ended within 15 minutes. Guests fled like the house was on fire, already composing the gossip they'd spread at next week's events. Mrs. Worthington left without saying goodbye. The Whitmore reputation, carefully constructed over 4 decades, crumbled in a single afternoon. By Sunday morning, my father's phone had stopped ringing. Business associates who'd called weekly for years suddenly had no availability. The country club manager called to discuss the family membership. A conversation that ended with my parents' platinum status being quietly downgraded pending financial review. Marcus Lakehouse deal fell apart by Monday. The sellers, having heard rumors about Whitmore Manufacturing's troubles, demanded immediate payment in full rather than the installment plan they'd agreed to. He couldn't pay. The deposit, $340, was forfeit. Brittany filed for legal separation on Tuesday. The paperwork cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the real reason. She'd married Marcus for the Whitmore name and the Whitmore money. Without either, she had no interest in remaining. Escalating consequences. On Wednesday, Mr. Harrison called to inform my parents that 2 board members had resigned, citing lack of confidence in leadership. These were men who'd sat at our family dinner table, who'd attended Marcus' wedding, who'd assured my father for years that the company was in good hands. By Friday, word had spread through the industry. Whitmore Manufacturing's biggest remaining client, a construction equipment company that represented 31% of annual revenue, announced they were exploring other suppliers, not leaving immediately, but not committing to renewal either. The stock, privately held though it was, became essentially worthless. Investors who'd been quietly approached about buying and suddenly had urgent conflicts preventing further discussions. The following Monday, the official call notice arrived. 30 days to produce $28 million or face asset seizure and liquidation. My father called every bank in the state, every private lender, every wealthy acquaintance he'd cultivated over 40 years of business. No one returned his calls. Marcus, meanwhile, had discovered the full extent of his financial exposure. The company wasn't just collateral for his lake house attempt. He'd also personally guaranteed a $2.3 million line of credit that he'd used for business development, which upon investigation turned out to be a series of failed investments in cryptocurrency and a nightclub that had closed within 6 months. That guarantee was now being called as well. His lawyer informed him that personal bankruptcy was not just possible, but probable. Final consequences. 3 weeks after the garden party, my father requested a meeting. Not at the house. My mother couldn't stop crying long enough to host, but at a restaurant downtown. Neutral territory. I agreed. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. The confident patriarch who dismissed my report cards and denied my requests had been replaced by a tired, frightened man who just learned that everything he believed about his family was wrong. Natalie, he couldn't quite meet my eyes. I need to ask you something. I'm listening. Would you? Is there any possibility you would consider restructuring the debt? I let the silence stretch for a moment. What would that restructuring look like? Hope flickered in his eyes. We could work out a payment plan, extended terms, lower interest. Give us time to turn the company around. And who would be running this turnaround? The hope dimmed. He knew what I was asking. Marcus has made some mistakes. Marcus has driven a 60-year-old company into the ground through a combination of incompetence and ego, I said calmly. In 18 months of monitoring the company's financials, I have not seen a single decision he's made that was based on sound business principles. He bought a manufacturing facility without checking zoning laws. He lost 3 major clients because he refused to modernize equipment. He took on high-interest debt to fund expansion instead of addressing core operational inefficiencies. My father said nothing. If I restructure this debt, I continued. Marcus is out completely. Not VP, not consultant, not involved in any capacity. He's my son and he's been your successor for 30 years. How's that working out? Another silence. What else? He finally asked. The board will be replaced. I'll select 3 members. The remaining seats can be filled by your choice, subject to my approval. You want control of the company. I want the company to survive. The only way that happens is with competent leadership and proper oversight." He stared at his untouched coffee for a long moment. "And if I agree, then I'll restructure the debt into a 5-year payment plan at 4% interest. The company will have breathing room to recover. If projections hold, you'll be debt-free and profitable within 4 years. And if I don't agree," I met his eyes steadily, "then asset liquidation begins in 9 days. The original facility sells, the equipment sells, the client contracts transfer to whoever buys them. Whitmore Manufacturing ceases to exist." 60 years, he whispered. "My father built that company from nothing." I know, and I did know. I'd spent my childhood watching, learning, understanding the business that I was never allowed to be part of. I'm offering you a chance to save it. But it requires admitting that you were wrong. About Marcus. About the company. I paused. About me. 3 days later, I received a signed agreement. Marcus was removed from all company operations. He would retain a small ownership stake, enough to maintain family dignity, not enough to influence decisions. Last I heard, he was consulting for a friend's startup, which was code for doing nothing while telling everyone he was between major opportunities. My father stepped back to Chairman Emeritus, a title with no authority, but enough prestige to preserve his self-image. The real decisions would be made by the new board, 3 seats of which I filled with people from my professional network, experienced manufacturing executives who knew how to turn around struggling operations. The company would survive. Whether it would thrive remained to be seen, but it had a chance now. A real chance for the first time in years. My mother called me the week after the agreement was signed. I almost didn't answer. Natalie, her voice was careful, stripped of the condescension I'd heard for 31 years. "I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" A long pause. "I've been thinking about things I said at the party. Before the party for a long time." "Okay, I was wrong." The words sounded like they physically heard her to say about you, about what you could do, what you could be. I said nothing. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't think I deserve that, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. What you've accomplished, who you are." "Thank you for saying that," I said. Could we have dinner sometime? Just the 2 of us." I considered the question. The 7-year-old inside me, the one who'd craved exactly this kind of acknowledgement, wanted desperately to say yes, to believe that things could be different now. That the revelation of my success had fundamentally changed who my mother was. But I was 31 years old. I'd learned some things about people. "Maybe someday," I said. "Not yet." She accepted that more gracefully than I expected. Perhaps she was learning too. The last call I made that week was to Dorothy Chin, my old mentor. She'd followed the situation from Chicago, receiving updates from mutual colleagues with a mixture of amusement and pride. "So," she said when I called, "how does it feel?" I thought about the question. Different than I expected. "How so?" I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant, like I'd finally proven something. And instead I watched the Chicago skyline from my office window, 34 floors up in a building I own 20% of. A view I'd earned with 2 decades of work and focus and refusing to believe what my family told me about myself. "I feel free," I said finally. "Not because they know now, because I realized their opinion never mattered as much as I thought it did. I built all of this without them, without their approval, without their acknowledgement. And now that you have it, how I know it was never about them. I smiled slightly. It was always about me, about proving to myself that I could. Dorothy laughed. That's the best revenge of all, you know, not making them see your success. Realizing you don't need them to see it. He was right. I hung up and turned back to my desk where the quarterly reports for they physically heard her to say about you, about what you could do, what you could be. I said nothing. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued. I don't think I deserve that, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. What you've accomplished, who you are. Thank you for saying that, I said. Could we have dinner sometime? Just the two of us. I considered the question. The 7-year-old inside me, the one who'd craved exactly this kind of acknowledgement, wanted desperately to say yes, to believe that things could be different now. That the revelation of my success had fundamentally changed who my mother was. But I was 31 years old. I'd learned some things about people. Maybe someday, I said. Not yet. She accepted that more gracefully than I expected. Perhaps she was learning too. The last call I made that week was to Dorothy Chin, my old mentor. She'd followed the situation from Chicago, receiving updates from mutual colleagues with a mixture of amusement and pride. So, she said when I called, how does it feel? I thought about the question. Different than I expected. How so? I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant, like I'd finally proven something. And instead I watched the Chicago skyline from my office window, 34 floors up in a building I own 20% of. A view I'd earned with 2 decades of work and focus and refusing to believe what my family told me about myself. I feel free, I said finally. Not because they know now, because I realized their opinion never mattered as much as I thought it did. I built all of this without them, without their approval, without their acknowledgement. And now that you have it, how I know it was never about them. I smiled slightly.